Getting older is such a fascinating thing because now I'm at a point in my life where movies that I watched when I was a little kid are now being remade. Usually I do spoiler reviews, but I'm gonna try to keep this as spoiler free as possible. So if you have not watched this movie, don't worry about it. You're good. Twisters is a movie that when I saw the trailer a few months ago, I was like, do we really need a remake for this? Like for me, I hate remakes. I hate reboots. I feel like we do it too much today. I always have to remind myself that I'm getting older. It's a completely younger generation that probably have no idea what the original Twister movie is. I was born in 1994. The original Twisters movie came out in 1996. There are little kids today that probably have no idea what that movie is. So for me, I grew up watching that movie. To me, that's a classic movie. Granted, I haven't watched that movie in years. I probably haven't watched that movie in over 15 years. So it probably looks terrible in 2024 standards, but to me, that movie was a classic. It was a big part of my childhood. I watched a lot of movies that I wasn't supposed to when I was younger. I watched The Exorcist, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers. None of those movies scared me when I was a little kid. Twister scared the crap out of me when I was a child. But for me, growing up, that movie is a classic. It had so many great classic moments in that movie. So whenever doing this remake of this, once I understood that it's a completely entire generation of people that probably have no idea what this movie is, I was willing to give it a shot. So going into this, I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't want to compare it too much to the old movie, but leaving, I feel like I have to. This movie was great. So the movie stars Daisy Edgar Jones. She plays the lead character named Kate. My guy from Transformers, Anthony Ramos, he plays Javi. And Glen Powell plays Tyler Owens. Glen Powell is a star. He's one of those dudes that I don't know too much about him. I've seen him in a couple of movies, but it seems like at this point, he's in everything. And we're going to talk more about his character in a second. So without any spoilers, the movie takes place in Oklahoma as we follow these storm chasers and scientists after they chase after these tornadoes because they're trying to figure out what causes tornadoes, why do they happen, and then when they do happen, what can we do to stop them before they cause even more damage. And so that's where the main character of Kate comes in. She's this super smart scientist, and then she has her partner named Javi. And then we get these YouTubers. Shout out to all the YouTubers. Glen Powell's character, he plays Tyler. He's this kind of country redneck cowboy that's going headfirst into tornadoes. Just a wild boy, pretty much. And so we have these two different factions with two completely different styles. And that pretty much is where the movie happens. So I want to talk about some of the highlights in this movie. And the first thing is pretty obvious. The visuals. The visuals in this movie is incredible. If you have an IMAX theater, if you live kind of farther away from a movie theater with the IMAX one, I highly recommend going to see this movie in IMAX. Visually, this was one of the most pleasing movies that I've seen in a long time. With some of the things that they were doing in this movie, I'm like, who? I mean, I get you want to save people and we need people to actually do this type of stuff, but who would purposely go out of their way to do this? Like when this movie started and when I saw some of the stuff that they were doing and what they had to deal with these tornadoes, the very first thought that crossed my mind was white people. There was a couple of moments in this movie that was obviously extremely unrealistic, but the main thing that I noticed that was the most unrealistic is that they had a black dude. Now look, I know some black people, they might want to go out and chase tornadoes, but I don't know too many brothers and sisters that are purposely going out of their way to go head first into a tornado. So that was the most unrealistic part of this movie. And for me, the other part of the movie that was the best was by far Glen Powell. Glen Powell is such a star. Like I said earlier, he seems like one of those actors. I feel like the same way with like Pedro Pascal and there's a couple of other people. It's like, how busy are they in their schedule? Like he seems like he's in everything. Like he was just in the Netflix movie like a few weeks ago, I believe. When his character got introduced and they showed all his team like this they were like these wacky YouTube storm chasers. I was like, I want to know more about them. Like forget the people we supposed to be following. I want to see more of them. And they do end up fleshing out his character, which I'm glad that they did, and they did make him a big part of this movie. Like he has a big role in this movie. But to me, those two were the best parts of this movie. Obviously the visuals and then Glen Powell and his teammates. The main thing that I would describe this movie with is fun. This was just a fun movie, and it does have serious moments, but I'm talking about just from a viewer perspective. Like when I was just watching this, like it was so many jaw-dropping moments in this movie where I was just like, damn, that looks really good. Like the main character, Kate, I'm not the biggest fan of hers. I mean, she was cool overall, but it was some stuff in this movie that just came off as like really cheesy. You know, like they put an emphasis on like this like handshake they were doing. The story itself isn't super complicated. It's not like it's a bunch of twists and turns or something like that. You get people who they see a tornado's coming and they go after a tornado, and then what happens during that tornado, that's what you need to see. Like I said, I wasn't a big fan of the main character. It was nothing against the actress. I don't think the actress was bad. It was just her character wasn't really for me. Also, I don't know how some people felt, but for me, I hated the first like 10 minutes of this movie. Like, I'm not gonna spoil what happened at the beginning of the movie, but it just seemed so ridiculous. Like, I thought it was some sort of like dream sequence, the way that everything was happening. It just wasn't for me. And this is where I go back to the comparisons to the original movie, because there's so many points that they're clearly referencing or just pulling things from the original movie. Like, the opening scene in the original movie, to me, traumatized me when I was a little kid. Spoiler, this movie came out like almost 30 years ago if you haven't seen that movie. In the original movie, the main character, or one of the main characters, she's a little girl and she watches her dad get sucked up into a tornado while they're in like a basement or something like that. Very traumatizing stuff. They do something here in this movie, I'm not going to say what exactly, but when I had to compare the two, I'm going with the original. And like in the original movie, they had the scene where I forgot what they said. It was like, oh, is that a cow, or do cows fly, or something like that? It was a cow that got sucked up by the tornado. We got cows. They kind of reference that in this movie. They do it differently. I'm not going to say what they did exactly, but when they did it, I was like, oh, that's supposed to be like in the first movie. Again, I like the original better. This isn't a spoiler because it was in the trailer, but they had the rodeo scene with the tornado. To me, I kind of compared that to the movie theater scene in the original movie. Again, I like the movie theater scene in the original movie. In the original movie, you had a love triangle. In this movie, we also sort of have a love triangle. I feel like as a film, this movie was better, but it just doesn't have what I would consider classic moments. Like, I don't know if maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it's just because I was a little kid, but I remember like that opening scene in the original movie, to me, that was a classic moment. When the cows were flying, that's a classic moment. The movie theater scene, that's a classic moment. They drove a truck through a house. That was a classic moment. Like, this movie had a lot of cool stuff. Like in the trailer, they showed the fire tornado. It looked really good, but I don't think that's gonna be something 5-10 years from now that I'm like, oh, remember that fire tornado and Twisters? But this movie was so good, and it was so much better than I thought it was gonna be. Like, I was ready to trash this movie, especially based off the first 10 minutes. I was ready to, man, I was gonna slander this movie so hard. It's not better than the original, this, that, and the third. But to me, this movie was so fun. This was a great summer movie. And the story for this movie, like I said, isn't anything crazy. It's not a lot of twists and turns. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward movie. Like I said, you storm chasers, you go out and you chase storms. Pretty straightforward. The story was good enough. I didn't need no Oppenheimer level of writing for this movie. Everybody was going to this movie because they want to see the storms and the twisters, and those were clearly the best parts. Like, some of the set pieces that they had looked phenomenal, especially at the end of the movie during the climax when everything was hitting the fan. Like, it was points where I felt like, because I was watching the IMAX, it felt like I was in a movie. Bro, I almost stood up in my theater. I was gonna be like, yo, take my hand. Hold on, I got you, take my hand. As of this recording, it looks like Twisters is set to make between $75 and $80 million in this opening weekend, which is far more than the original projected numbers of $50 to $55 million. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a critic score of 77% and a fan rating of 92%. I kind of want to go 8.5, but I don't do half scores, so I'm going to give this movie an 8, which is a great on my scale. This was a fun movie. Fun summer movie. You could take the family out. It was a bunch of little kids in there too. They seemed like they was having a blast. But good characters, or good enough characters, good enough story, and the visuals are some of the best things you will ever see. Like I said, if you have an IMAX theater near you, I highly recommend you going to watch this movie in IMAX. Like I said, I felt like I was basically inside of this movie. I felt like I was inside the storm. Because of the name, I feel like it's a big enough name recognition that it was going to do well in the box office. But this movie overall was just so much better than I thought that it was going to be, especially for a remake or reboot, whatever you want to call it. I also do hope that this is just a one-off. I don't need them trying to do a Twisters 2 or something like that, even though, you know, money talks in Hollywood. I hope they just leave this one-off. Really great movie. Definitely go see this. But thank you guys for watching. Like, subscribe if you're new here. We talk about a bunch of different things on this channel. What were your thoughts on this movie? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Please try to keep the comment section spoiler free. I just got back from the movie theater, so these are kind of just my free-flowing thoughts here. Also, real quick, I'm not going to tell y'all where I work at, but I've actually been storm chasing before. Not fun. I remember I got to work and my boss stopped me in the parking lot. He was like, hey, guess what you're doing today? I remember they put me in the back seat of this truck because I had to control some cameras, and I just remember we were sitting in the parking lot and the guy was like, yeah, I think this storm is showing some rotation over here. Let's go that way. And me, I was the only black dude in the car. In my mind, I'm like, why are we going towards the storm? You know what I'm saying? People like that are crazy. So when I saw this movie, it just reminded me of that moment. But I've been storm chasing. It is something that I'm gonna be able to tell people years from now. Well, it's actually kind of exciting looking back on it, but I don't ever want to do that again. But once again, thank you guys for watching. Like I said, comment below, this, that, and the third. Love you guys. Tell someone you love them. Until next time, see you in the next life.